Good evening, everyone. We'd like to call this meeting of Health and Human Services Subcommittee to order. Today, it looks like we have 4 briefings. And we'd like to start today with State Department of Assessment and Taxation, and like to bring up Budget Analyst, Mr. Ryan Green. Is he here?
Yes.
Sorry, it's connecting. I apologize for the delay.
He didn't make it to that area until now.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As we can see on the first page, the fiscal 2024 budget would increase SSTAT's budget by $4 million or 2.5% to $1.62 million. If we look at Exhibit 1 on page 4, we can see that personal property returns assessed timely have increased since the previous year, and this is largely attributed to the lesser effects of the pandemic. However, they've yet to fully recover to pre-pandemic levels. If we look at Exhibit 2 on page 5, we can see that the assessment accuracy has declined 5%, which SSTAT has largely attributed to the high turnover associated with real property assessors, and that newer assessors tend to be less accurate. If we look at Exhibit 3 on page 6, we can see that for the enterprise zone investment and participation, overall participation is up 8.9% and investment is up 5.6% since the previous year. If we look also on page 6 for the proposed deficiencies, Chapter 717 of 2021 required SSTAT to determine whether a homeowner was owed additional property tax credits due to changes in the way the homeowner's tax credit was calculated. These funds were going to come from the local reserve account, and SSTAT was to repay that with funds in the 2023 budget. Funds attributed to this purpose were reverted in error in the previous year, and so they have been allocated $7.3 million in conjunction with money already in the budget, in the 2023 budget, to fully repay the account. Additionally, they have $530,000 in the allowance that will be reduced contingent upon legislation to modify the repayment schedule. Additionally, on page 7, we can see that there is a $16 million planned reversion for the homeowner's tax credit, which will bring expenditures more in line with historical spending, which will be discussed later in this analysis. On page 8, looking at Exhibit 4, we can see that overall agency spending, the majority of spending, 54%, goes to tax credit programs, with another third for personnel, and the remaining expenditures being the Cloud Revenue Integrated System, the CRIS project, contracts, and other expenditures. On the next page, on Exhibit 5, sorry, again, that the agency spending by function, the majority of agency spending is on the tax credit programs, with assessments being another 27%, along with IT and the charter unit comprising the rest. Oh, wrong thing again. Moving ahead to the next page for Exhibit 6, looking at tax credit program spending, the vast majority of tax credit program spending goes to the homeowner's tax credit, with 31% going to the enterprise zone tax credit and the remainder going to the renter's tax credit. On the following page, we can see Exhibit 7, that the budget increases by about $4 million. And this is largely driven by the increases to the homeowner's tax credit, as well as a $5.3 million audit of the homestead tax credit, which will improve other auditing processes once it's complete, as well as identify new sources of income for state. On the following page, for personnel data, we can see that there are 58 total vacancies within SDAT. 26 or 45% have been vacant for less than 6 months. 6 of them, or 10%, have been vacant for more than a year. Moving along to the next page, for the issues in real property, high turnover has troubled SDAT for many years. Additionally, the assessor vacancy rate has increased from 10.9% in fiscal 2022 to 14.2% in fiscal 2023. The high level of vacancies impacts SDAT's ability to conduct assessments and impacts other agencies, such as the Property Tax Assessment Appeals Board, as well. To their credit, SDAT has undertaken an effort to combat the vacancy issue, however. For instance, they have attended job fairs and posted notices about assessor vacancies on social media and in local newspapers. In their October 2022 report, SDAT noted an average of 15.2 applicants per posting. Additionally, they have submitted the third JCR requested on February 6th. That was due February 15th, or January 15th. Looking at Exhibit 8 on the previous page, or sorry, on the following page, we can see real property assessor vacancies by county. Baltimore City and Prince George's County have the highest vacancies. SDAT should comment on its progress and challenges in hiring and retaining assessors, as well. DLS recommends adopting committee narrative requesting that SDAT continue to provide quarterly updates on its real property valuation program and discussion initiatives to improve recruitment and retention. Later on that same page, we have a discussion of the homeowners and renters tax credit. As we can see on the following page for Exhibit 9, homeowners and renters tax credit applications have both decreased in the previous year. This is due to, in fiscal 2021, a popular misconception that the pandemic would make more people qualified for tax relief, and so more people applied. However, this was not the case. In the following year, with that misunderstanding no longer as common, less people applied, and accordingly, there were increases in the number of applicants deemed eligible. If we look at Exhibits 10 and 11, we can see that for the homeowners and renters tax credit utilization, there's a peak in 2019 for the homeowners tax credit that then declines consistently throughout 2022. And we can see that the 2023 adjusted spending, which was originally $64 million, has been reduced to $48 million to bring it in line with historical averages. DLS recommends adopting committee narrative requesting that SDAT submit a report on options to alter eligibility requirements to increase the pool of eligible applicants for the homeowners and renters tax credits. The final issue is related to the Cloud Revenue Integrated System staffing instability. While the project has made consistent progress throughout the year, it is noted that the agency has struggled to maintain technical mainframe specialists, as several have been hired and left the agency within the year. The agency should comment on how it plans to improve retention of the technical mainframe specialists and how retention challenges might delay progress of the CRISP project. DLS recommends adopting committee narrative requesting that SDAT submit quarterly reports on the CRISP project progress. The following pages provide the exact wording for our reports as well as additional appendices. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Green. And are there any questions by any members of the committee? Seeing none, at this moment, I'd like to bring up Director Michael Higgs to give the agency report.
Thank you and good afternoon, Chair McCray and members of the subcommittee. I'm Michael Higgs, Director of the Maryland State Department of Assessments and Taxation. Thank you for taking the time to review SDAT's budget and performance. SDAT is charged with the assessment of all real property and business property in the state, maintaining the state's charter business registry, and processing important property-based tax credits. I have with me some of our subject matter experts to help answer any questions you guys may have. Associate Director Stephen Clampett is here to assist with any business service or tax credit questions. We have our State Supervisor of Real Property next to him, Dan Phillips, will be able to answer any questions you may have about our largest program. CFO Christina Trotta to my left is available for any questions relating to the budget. Bob Yeager is here if anyone would like to discuss the homeowners protection program that we operate. And our customer experience operations manager, Jaminese Clark, is going to spend the next couple of minutes telling you guys about some of our exciting plans for the upcoming year. Jamie?
Thank you and good morning. Thank you, Director Higgs, and good morning, Senator McCray and members of the subcommittee. For the record, again, my name is Jaminese Clark, and I am the operations manager for the new Office of Customer Experience that was recently formed in October of 2022. I'm excited today to share with you some details about this new office and our mission. Again, it's such an honor to be able to talk about this new office today, so I thank you very much for the invitation. So the mission of this office is quite simple. We're here to create and maintain an engaged and informed workforce. Understanding our customers and employees' needs are going to be key in influencing engagement and retention within our agency. We believe that the best way to provide customer service to the public is to provide our staff with great support, tools and resources, training, communication, and recognition. So how are we doing this? We're developing and executing strategies to help empower our managers to focus on 3 Ps: people, performance, and progress. People engagement is our first step to maintain a successful customer service journey within our agency. We are working on a standardized new hire onboarding training and a customer service call flow guide for all divisions within SDAT. The highlight of additional training sessions will cover the importance of listening, both through the voice of the customer strategy and through our customer journey mapping that will provide insight on where to detect and remove sludge to improve efficiencies and customer experience. Our leadership development program also includes training to help supervisors improve digital literacy and shift from traditional to servant leadership to help manage and inspire a diverse workforce, which is critical to the success of SDAT. Performance is the next step to our Engage to Win strategy. Efforts of the department includes performing performance analysis of all of our program public content, processes, and procedures. We're also recommending improvements, including the use of technology and new data. We are using a design thinking approach, which is a problem-solving technique that puts real people at the center of the development process, enabling us to streamline services and provide support that are tailored to our audience needs. And last but not least, progress. This new office will track and measure our progress by performing follow-up reviews and audits to ensure that all suggested improvements are functioning as expected and customers' needs are being met. We're also, again, striving to retain our employees in this workforce environment. These strategies were used within the creation of our customer service contact center, which is now in place, and the centralized hub for our business services division. And I am confident confident, that this customer service driven team will continue to grow beyond business services and best serve the entire agency. Thank you very much for your time today. I'll turn it back over to Director Higgs.
Thanks, Jamie. SDAT has no objection to the recommended actions from DLS. There was a couple things that we were asked to discuss. I want to start with the assessor vacancies. That has been an issue with the department for an awful long time. The issue that we have there is that it takes so long to train up assessors. It's a 3-year process to train a residential assessor to get them fully trained. And then if somebody goes on to commercial, it's another 2 to 3 year process to train them up. The problem is the salary structure that we have in Maryland is not competitive with the salary structure of surrounding jurisdictions. We're one of the only states that handles it centrally by the state level. Everyone else handles it at the county level. So we have Fairfax, Loudoun, District of Columbia. We have other jurisdictions around us have been poaching our experienced assessors. And it's not just that. There's other government jobs that pay better. We've lost assessors in Montgomery County who go to become clerks for Montgomery County government and move papers and boxes because they make more money. So we really need to figure out a way of addressing the hemorrhaging that we're experiencing of personnel in the real property assessments program before we start to run into some major problems. We've been doing more with less for a long time, but the system is nearing a breaking point. So if we want to continue to get good data for our taxpayers, for our counties on the assessment front, we're going to have to look at something being done with that program in order to sustain the excellent services that we've been able to provide to date. It was mentioned the mainframe specialist turnover. We have too many systems still on the Annapolis data center. Green screen programming, green screen interfaces, COBOL programming. It's the type of thing that it's a skill set no longer being trained out there. It's dying away. And when you have somebody who has this type of training, they are in high demand because of all the legacy systems that are still out there, largely by government operations. And the last 3 that we've had, within 2 weeks, each one of them got a job offer that paid them substantially more than they had offered. They had accepted the job for the state and left us. So our efforts to attempt to get one of our programs off of the mainframe has been delayed for, I think we're in month 5 of an RFP because we just don't have the manpower to handle our legacy systems and address what we need to do to modernize. So we've been hitting some hurdles on that front. But with that said, I'm happy to help you guys out with any questions you may have and open things up to my subject matter experts. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Higgs. And I only have one question. In the previous report, there was a customer survey that was acknowledged that it was kind of decreasing and the feedback that was coming in, it was deleted out of this analyst report. If you can first speak to very quickly if it's still incorporated, if you all still do it, and if so, how's it going?
We do customer service surveys. We have a customer service survey at a link at the bottom of everyone's email in the agency. Mm-hmm. We also have customer service palm cards that we have in all of our 24 county offices. And the customer feedback that we have also on the third category would be Maryland Business Express. Maryland Business Express consistently receives feedback or 97, 98% satisfaction rate. It is consistently regarded as one of the best business formation and business charter websites in the country. And the feedback for that it's been phenomenal. For the remaining customer service for real property, Dan, do you have recent numbers on that?
I don't have the recent numbers.
No problem. Director Higgs, so I can see the last 5 previous to 2022. If you could just supply it to the committee, that would be great.
Absolutely.
Thank you. I see Senator Hedelman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, you alluded in your comments and in your written report about the pay differential between what we are able to pay and surrounding areas. Can you provide the subcommittee with research on what our competitors are paying?
Absolutely. Happy to supply that.
Thank you.
Saying no further questions by the committee, just want to thank you again, Mr. Green, for the phenomenal analysis. And thank you, Director Higgs. Your office is very, very efficient. And I appreciate that every time I do reach out, it comes back very quick. Thank you again.
Thank you, Senator. Appreciate it.
Colleagues,
you.
at this time, we're going to bring up the next agency. It's going to still be done by Budget Analyst Ryan Green, but it's going to be the Property Tax Assessment Appeals Board.
Green, you can start.
Share screen.
Thank you again. As we can see on the first page, the fiscal 2024 budget would increase PTAB's budget by $103,000 or 9.2% to $1.2 million. There's one proposed deficiency in the fiscal 2024 budget for $35,480 in general funds, which would provide 2 contractual full-time equivalent positions to help manage the case backload. Additionally, lower on that same page, we can look at Exhibit 1 for an overview of agency spending, where we can see that the vast majority of PTAB's expenses are related to personnel, with rent and other expenses and service allocations making up the rest. Moving along to the next page for Exhibit 2, we can see that the proposed budget would again increase by $103,000. And this is largely driven by increased health insurance premiums and reducing the contractual turnover expectancy to 0. On the next page, looking at personnel, we can see that there's 1 vacancy and it's been open less than 3 months. On the next page, looking at the case backlog, it remains high. And this is largely due to COVID-19 related delays with processing backlogs, and that they have yet to fully recover to pre-pandemic levels of case clearance. While PTAB has been delayed by problems with real assessors with SDAT, and they've been able to work out a solution, such as bringing in retired supervisors from SDAT, PTAB should comment on the degree with which SDAT has assisted the agency in redressing the backlog, how the new contractual full-time equivalents will assist in resolving the backlog, and when it foresees returning to pre-pandemic levels. Looking at the bottom of that same page on Exhibit 4 for reversals by the tax court. While reversals have doubled since the previous year, if we compare the current reversal rate to the 5-year average, it is still below the 5-year rate by 4%. Finally, DLS's recommended action is that we concur with the governor's allowance. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Green. And at this moment, I'd just like to bring up Administrator Green. And seeing no questions.
Thank you and good afternoon, Chairman McCray, members of the subcommittee. I am Julie Green-Christ. I am the administrator of the Property Tax Assessment Appeal Boards. The Property Tax Assessment Appeal Boards concurs with the legislative analyst as well as the governor's allowance. I am pleased to answer any and all questions you may have at this time.
Probably one of the better ones. Madam Administrator, I did have one question. When I looked at Baltimore City's numbers for the backlog, I saw it was like 511. Is that pretty high considering?
That is extremely low compared to previous years,
Well,
historically.
in comparison to other jurisdictions. So like when I looked at
Yes,
everybody
they are the
else's,
highest.
they were still in the 2, 3s.
Yes.
Okay. And I'll talk with Analyst Green about that. Is there any questions from the committee? Seeing none. Thank you, Administrator Green. Thank you, Mr. Green. No relation.
Thank you.
And we'll go to our third committee analysts, and that will be Ms. Morgan Smith with the MDH Health Professional Boards and Commissions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I'm Morgan Smith, and I am the analyst that is here to present the operating budget for the health professional boards and commissions today. We will start on page 1. Let's see. And look at the operating budget summary. You'll see that in fiscal 2024, the health board's budget increased 4.7 million or 8.7% to 58.8 million. The majority of their budget is funded by special funds, many of which are collected through fees, and they are primarily used for administrative purposes for regular and contractual personnel. The 3 boards that are funded by general funds are the State Board of Environmental Health Specialists, the State Board of Nursing Home Administrators, and the State Board of Residential Childcare. We're moving on to Exhibit 2. Exhibit 2 shows the proposed budget, and on page 4, you'll see, let me scroll. On page 4, you'll see that under bolded headers, we have 3 of the boards with the largest changes separated out from the other boards. I just want to note that the Medical Cannabis Commission is the board that is seeing the highest amount of growth. You'll note that there is $2 million for the public health education campaign. This was required by Chapter 26 of 2022. This bill, and I'll talk about this later, but this bill legalized recreational adult use cannabis. And if the constitutional amendment passed at the end of the election, which it did, then this bill, Chapter 26, was going to take effect, which it did, and that is why there is funding for this public health education campaign. You'll also see some additional changes, $1.1 million for various contracts, $1 million for the patient's applications enterprise system, and I also note $289,000 for new vehicles for field operations. Moving on to page 5, we will have a discussion of personnel. In fiscal 2024, the board saw a net increase of 2 full-time positions and a net increase of 6.66 contractual full-time equivalents. As of the writing of this report, the health boards had 20.85 vacant positions, which is 24.15 positions over their budgeted turnover. DLS asked that MDH comment on steps taken to reduce the vacancies at the boards and how these vacancies are impacting operations. On page 6, we're going to start the discussion on observations. The first observation is regarding the managing for results goals of the boards. The boards are expected to meet certain goals, like issuing 95% of initial licenses within 10 days of the receipt of the last qualifying document, annually issuing 90% of renewal licenses at the Board of Nursing and 95% for all other boards within 5 days of the receipt of the last qualifying document, and improve their percentage of complaint investigations completed by both the boards of physicians and nursing at 90%, and then within all other boards of 100%. Exhibit 3 on the following page shows the managing for results goals and the number of goals that have been missed by the boards in total. Most importantly, 11 boards missed their investigation goal in fiscal 2022. This is particularly concerning as the board should be investigating practitioners with whom consumers have filed complaints. Without timely investigations, it is possible that there are practitioners who may be practicing improperly or providing subpar care. Exhibit 4 on page 8 shows aggregate data from the last 5 fiscal years. The bolded percentages indicate missed goals experienced by each board per year. Fiscal 2019 has the highest number of boards missing their investigation goal, with 16 boards failing to investigate complaints against providers in a timely manner. There were slight improvements made since, with only 10 of the 21 assessed boards, or 47%, having missed that investigation goal in fiscal 2022. The Board of Dental Examiners, the Board of Pharmacy, the Board of Physical Therapy Examiners, the Board of Professional Counselors and Therapists, and the Board of Social Work Examiners had managing for results data that showed their performance at 50% or lower for investigations. Of these, 3 of these boards have not met this goal for the last 5 fiscal years. DLS asked that MDH comment on efforts to assist the boards of dental examiners, pharmacy, physical therapy examiners, professional counselors and therapists, and social work examiners, as well as any other board who has not met its investigation goals for consecutive years in meeting its MFR goals, and steps taken in order to ensure timely investigations are taking place. We'll move on to the next observation. It begins on the end of page 8 and then on to page 9. The Board of Dental Examiners has met none of their managing for results goals in the last 5 fiscal years. Of the goals of the board, it includes meeting 95% of new and renewal licenses within 10 days and 5 days respectively, and investigating 100% of complaints within 180 days. Exhibit 5 shows the Board of Examiners processing timelines. Each bar represents a different goal. So blue is new licenses, red is renewal, and green is investigation. And this is over the last 5 fiscal years. The Board of Dental Examiners has fallen short of these goals for the last 5 fiscal years, with performance consistently under 50% on each of the measures in fiscal 22 through 2022, and for 2 of these measures in fiscal 2018 and 2019. Committee narrative in the 2022 Joint Chairman's Report requested that the Board of Dental Examiners submit a report detailing the reasons for the board's difficulty in meeting set goals and how the board planned to remedy its low percentages of timely completing of licensing, renewal, and investigation of complaints. The report was due November 1st, 2022, and as of the writing of this analysis, the report had not yet been submitted. Due to the failure to meet the established goals, and because the report had not been submitted at the time of the publishing of this analysis, DLS had recommended adding language restricting funds until the submission of the report. However, the report was submitted yesterday, February 9th, and can be found on the library's website. Finally, moving on to page 10. There's a discussion regarding the transfer of the Medical Cannabis Commission to the Alcohol and Tobacco Commission. Chapter 26 of 2022 expressed the intent of the General Assembly to transfer MMCC to the Alcohol Tobacco Commission if Chapter 45, the constitutional amendment legalizing adult use and the possession of recreational cannabis, was approved, which it was by the voters in the 2022 general election. Chapter 26 also required that MMCC and ATC make a recommendation to the General Assembly about the transfer, including the transfer of personnel to ensure costs of the transfer were minimized, how their employees will retain their rate of pay, working conditions, benefits, rights, and/or status, and ensure personnel can retain merit and retirement statuses from MMCC at the time of the transfer. The report was submitted on October 11, 2022, and it included several recommendations that are listed on page 10 that I'll let you read at your leisure. DLS notes that the fiscal 2022 budget does not reflect a transfer of funding from MMCC to ATC in anticipation of the consolidation of the commissions. MMCC should comment on the process for the transfer of their budget to ATC and an estimated date for the funding consolidation. On page 11, you will see the recommended action relating to the Board of Dental Examiners that I discussed earlier. And on the following pages, you will find an appendix related to the JCRs that were submitted last year. There is one outside of the Board of Dental Examiners that has not yet been submitted as of the speaking at this hearing, which was the required JCR on the cybersecurity impacts of the boards. And then in addition, there's a second appendix on the following pages that walks through the licensing and regulatory management system project that has been going on at the boards for the last couple of years. And I will note that the funding for that is allocated in the MDH administration budget. And with that, that ends my presentation, and I'm happy to take questions.
Seeing no questions, but would like to say thank you, Ms. Smith, for the thorough report, but more importantly, emailing a copy of the report that was late so that we can make sure it's on our radar. At this time, I see no questions from my colleagues, so I would like to bring up Dr. Scott and her team to give the agency's response.
Can you see me? Sorry. Good afternoon, Chairman McCray, members of the subcommittee, Laura Herrera Scott, Acting Health Secretary of the Maryland Department of Health. At the table is Kimberly Link, all the way to the left, Senior Advisor for Health Board Matters, and Emily Brandenburg, our Chief Financial Officer. In addition, there are several representatives from the health occupation boards and commissions, and I would like to take a moment to thank all the board staff for working to reduce the written responses and the budget data for DLS's analysis. And as always, thank you, Ms. Smith, for your work on the DLS analysis. The 20 health occupation boards and commissions play a vital role in Maryland's economy and are fundamental to ensuring access to health care. Over 400,000 Marylanders are licensed by the boards, and I look forward to working with each of the boards to help support and improve their customer service. In addition, as Governor Moore highlighted, workforce development in his call to service our key priorities for the administration. I intend to have continuing conversations with members of this committee, the health policy committees, and each of the boards on health force recruitment, development, and retention. I will now turn to Emily Brandenburg, who will provide the department's responses, and Kim Link, who will summarize the board's responses to DLS's analysis. The various board representatives are available to come to the table if needed for additional questions, with additional answers if necessary.
Thank you, Secretary Scott. I would also like to take a brief moment again to thank Morgan Smith and our entire DLS analyst team for their hard work and thoughtful analysis. We're making progress. We have a long way to go, but we're getting there. So thank you, guys. I'm going to jump right into our responses. The department was asked to comment on steps taken to reduce vacancies at the boards and how these vacancies impact operations. Each of the health occupation boards are statutorily independent of the department. The Maryland Department of Health supports each board in the same manner in which our HR department supports other programs across the Maryland Department of Health. We provide an HR officer that supports the boards with completing various HR processes. Just recently, HR and Finance worked closely with the Board of Nursing to refresh their knowledge on required HR processes and identify possible efficiencies in the Board of Nursing practices. Maryland Department of Health HR department has spent additional time supporting and coaching the newer executive directors who may feel less familiar with the state HR processes. The executive directors and the boards that they report to are the appointing authorities, and as such, they manage their vacant positions according to state practices. Each board employs at least one individual whose responsibility includes HR. As each board has varying levels of vacancies, generally speaking, vacancies could impact operations from a loss of knowledge, workloads, hiring, training perspectives, et cetera. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Ms. Link, who will respond to the remaining questions in the analysis. Thank you, Kim.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Kim Link, Senior Advisor for Health Boards. I'd like to summarize the responses of the boards to the question pertaining to the some of the board's inability to meet investigation goals for consecutive years. With respect to the dental board reports has had difficulty filling investigator positions due to the lengthy HR approval process. The board is working with the department and DBM to resolve its staffing concerns. The board also reports that the length of board investigations is dependent on the nature of the case, what is learned during the investigation, and whether the respondent in each particular case is cooperating with the investigation. The Board of Pharmacy reports that there has been a recent decline in the rate of case closures, and that has been impacted by the pandemic. The board reports that there's been an increase in the number of pharmacy facility violations during the pandemic, and that there's been also been an increase in the complaints received and an increase in the severity of the issues involved in those complaints. The board reports that as the effects of the pandemic have lessened, it has noticed improved operations, which presumably will result in fewer complaints. And the board expects to have all open cases that exceed the 180-day time period to be closed by April 30th of this year. The board is working with the department and DBM to correct the MFR to reflect the complaint resolution rate of 69% rather than 41% as stated in the MFR. The Board of Physical Therapy Examiners reports that they had a 6-month period from January to June of 2022 when the board had no investigators. The board has 3 contractual positions that assist with investigations. The governor's fiscal year 2024 allowance includes the conversion of 2 of these positions from contractual to merit positions, and the board is recruiting to fill the remaining contractual position. The board states that the contractual conversions and filling the contractual vacancy will improve staff retention and board operations. The Board of Physical Therapy Examiners is also working with MDH and DBM to correct the MFR to reflect the correct complaint resolution rate from 60% rather than 50%. With respect to the Board of Professional Counselors and Therapists, the board reports that it has been operating with insufficient investigation staff despite a dramatic increase in the number of licensees and complaints. In 2022, the board lost a full-time investigator, which left all investigations to be handled by the compliance manager. In November of 2022, the board hired a full-time investigator. That investigator recently resigned from the board. Once again, the compliance manager will be responsible for all investigations until that vacancy is filled. The board states that it's experienced issues recruiting investigators due to salary limitations, and it is in the process of recruiting for a full-time investigator, 2 full-time contractual investigators. The board would like to note that in 2021, it fully implemented an electronic investigation compliance tracking system and hired a full-time compliance assistant to provide administrative support, which helps expedite the investigation process. With respect to the Board of Social Work Examiners, the board reports that timely investigations were hampered by a board personnel issue that has since been resolved. The board currently has 1 full-time investigator and 1 part-time investigator is in the process of hiring for the 2 vacancies it has. The board reports difficulties in recruitment as it reports that it's only obtained 1 application for a current vacancy and has had to repost for the position. With respect to the analyst's comment about adding language that would restrict funds from the Board of Dental Examiners, the Board of Dental Examiners refers back to its response to the Joint Chairman's report, which it states that it filed in November of 22. It has resubmitted as Ms. Smith stated yesterday. The Dental Board also would like to point out that the MFR data was incorrect and they will work and has worked to make that correct information known in its most recent report. The Dental Board would like to point out that it does not concur with the proposed action of restricting funding and believes that doing so would be counterproductive to address the issues highlighted in the report. And that concludes my summary. Happy to take any questions.
Senator Jennings.
I want to talk about the Board of Nursing. Madam Secretary, I know you're new, so this isn't targeted at you. We're just trying to figure out what's going on. My office is inundated with calls from nurses. Unfortunately, my name has gotten on social media that my office is able to help. So I have 46 other districts that keep calling, asking for help, and my staff is trying their best while working with their senator to help them through it. What is going on? What is causing this?
So I can't speak to what's causing it. I think in the HGO briefing on the Board of Nursing, the 2 issues that were highlighted was staffing and the IT issue. Those were at least the 2 that I heard at the hearing. I met with the executive director today and the board chair, and as you know, Delegate Kelly has introduced a bill that would make some changes to the board, similar to the Board of Physician bill a few years ago. And based on at least some of the traction there, the board has been very open and willing to work together to figure it out. This morning, we talked about bucketing the items that are impacting their ability to pick up phones, to respond to licensures, close, get licenses out the doors, to respond to complaints. But they are giving me a list of issues, and we're going to start working towards addressing each of those issues, including key personnel related to IT and HR to staff. Many of the positions have been cleared by the department, but there's not enough resources on their side to actually then do the outreach and interviewing for those positions. So that's just some of the issues I'm aware of. But again, we met with the Board of Nursing this morning, and I feel like we have a good plan. We're going to be meeting weekly to develop what the plan is of things that need to be fixed, even while this other bill is
Okay.
going through the process.
Do you know how understaffed you are now? Do you know the number?
I
that-
don't
for that-
know.
That board?
I don't know. I think the number was 40, I want to say. I don't remember the exact number. So that's, don't quote me on that number, but it's high. But I don't know what that is of the denominator. I don't know how many total positions they have in the vacancy compared to that total position. And then where those vacancies are. Are they investigators? Are they licensing people? So I don't know which of the positions that they need filled.
Okay. And looking at the report on page 12 at the bottom, it's the licensing regulatory management system project. That IT procurement, is that for all boards or just the nursing board?
You know, Kim?
The report that was prepared by Do It is for all boards, and it's broken down by board.
Okay, because what caught me here was there was a discrepancy of $2 million in fiscal 2022. And now we've bumped up 8 million to 10 million. And it was based off of a feasibility study to prioritize the needs of the Board of Nursing. And I'm trying to, if you've got 20 boards, you're telling me you're increasing it 6 million just for the nursing, what's the issue? And then the other concern I have is we did not provide a cost analysis comparison to other states. So I'm just trying to figure out who made the decision to go after this, procure it, and put out an RFP and not look at other states. And that's not necessarily, I'm not coming at you guys. I'm just trying to get these answers. And I don't know if the analyst has more intel she can give me.
I can work with Secretary Savage and get you an answer on the
Okay.
Do It question. I would guess, and this is just a guess, based on the delta, the increase related to the Board of Nursing. I mentioned that there's about 400 clinicians that go through the different boards. The Board of Nursing is responsible for more than half of them. There's about
Okay.
230,000 plus licenses that go through the Board of Nursing. The rest of the boards and commissions is everyone else. So the Board of Nursing licenses most of those 400,000, more than half.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Jennings. Senator Hedelman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I know that most of the information we have here is about investigatory goals. Can you, following up slightly on what my colleague here said, talk a little bit specifically with regard to the Board of Social Work and the Board of Counselors and Therapists, since we all seem to have been placing a large focus on mental health, as rightly we should, whether there are delays in licensing for these really important practitioners.
So do you know the number of? We're going to have to get back to you
Okay,
on that. I
that's fine.
think, at least in the short time I've been here, my focus has been on the Board of Nursing for based on some of the issues that
Right.
you're all aware of, but I can certainly get back to you on. So it's the psychologists and the social workers.
Psychologists, social workers, and counselors and therapists.
Okay,
It sort of jumped out because they have the counselors and therapists and the social workers have the higher missed investigation goals.
Senator, if I may,
Yeah.
the director for the Board of Social Work Examiners has a conflict, wasn't able to be here today, but the executive director for the Board of Professional Counselors and Therapists is here today, Laura Berg, if you would like her to come up to the table and
If
answer
she
your
has
questions.
an ability to comment on that question, that would be great.
Hello, I'm Laura Berg. I am one of the newly hired EDs at the Department of Health. I'm with the Board of Professional Counselors and Therapists. It's a pleasure to be here. As far as your question, the expectation is that licensing happens within 30 days, and that's always our goal. Certainly, some delays occur because we don't have all the required documentation from those applying. Most of our licensee types also require an examination that needs to be taken. So there's sort of an initial process and then there's a back end process. So all of that sort of affects the timeline. But again, our goal is to get it done in 30 days, as long as we have all of the required documentation. And since I've started, that's sort of an area of focus for me to make sure that we're getting those things done in a timely fashion. So I'm sort of really focusing on that, and I'm trying to establish a real clear sense of exactly what all steps of the process entails and where we can create greater efficiencies.
So it would be helpful. Do you have a system set up, or am I hear you saying that you're creating a system to be able to track that licensing time?
So there's been systems, the board's been without an ED for some time. So I've come in and sort of trying to kind of get clarity on all of the different places where there are gaps or there needs to be some significant improvements. And so we have established a system more recently to get a better clarity on sort of how many applications are coming in monthly and how many are going out monthly in terms of actually getting licensed. We're continuing to refine that process, but that is one of the #1 priorities that I have.
Okay, thank you. And I realize, Madam Secretary, that you're brand new, but it seems to me that this is a really important issue across the board here. So I'd appreciate any follow-up when you have it. Thank you.
Well, what I can tell you, just reading this and dealing with understanding the issues of the Board of Nursing, is I'm to the point that you're just making, creating a dashboard by board to answer these key questions. So at any given time, we can be able to give an update on vacancies, on time to licensing, on investigations. So that's certainly my goal.
Sounds terrific. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Hadelman. And Madam Secretary, Dr. Scott, I typically would ask questions, but I also know that this is something that you inherited. But I do think that this is a serious issue. We see that from the line of questioning that just took place. I saw that I want to acknowledge that the restriction is no longer needed because of the report being turned in, but I do think that the subcommittee has a responsibility to follow this issue. And I would take any suggestive ideas to help us follow this issue during the interim that you may have, because we'll be working together to kind of put together something to make sure that we follow this issue.
Well, as I just mentioned, I've certainly thought about creating a dashboard and what are the key metrics that we want to be able to be responsive to you all and to the constituents as things come up, whether I can't get my license in time or I was treated poorly by someone, as a complaint. So that's the way I'm thinking about it initially. And then certainly on not just on the hiring process, I think we need to do more on our recruiting process, which is across MDH been posting a link somewhere, which is not enough. And what does that recruitment process look like? And then how do we do professional development and efforts to retain the people once we have them in place? So more to come on that as well.
So I lead with Madam Secretary. I feel very confident in your energy, the intensity, just how you articulate the issues and how we move forward, and just look forward to solutions and path forwards in reference to address this issue. Thank you again. Senator Jennings.
I just want to say, I know you inherited this. This is not this administration. This has been going on all fall and winter. So I just want to make sure I'm not coming at you or this administration. I'm just trying to find out what caused it, months ago, and what got us here.
And I don't take it personally at all. I'm more concerned about getting the workforce in the hospitals, in the clinics, or wherever these clinicians are needed to serve Marylanders. So I'm with you.
Yep, colleagues, just want to thank Morgan Smith, and we'll all huddle with Ms. Smith, to figure out what the appropriate language is working with the secretary. And thank you, Madam Secretary, for your due diligence and just the responses that you gave in reference to this issue.
Thank you.
We'll bring up the last agency report, which is Department of Housing and Community Development. And for that, we'll have Ms. Emily Haskell, the budget analyst.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, my name is Emily Haskell, and I'll be presenting the operating budget analysis for the Department of Housing and Community Development, or DHCD. In the operating budget summary on page 1, you can see DHCD's fiscal 2024 allowance decreases by 18.5% to about $480 million. Excluding COVID-19 relief programs, the allowance actually increases by about 3%, mostly due to a $10 million increase in federal funds for Section 8 project-based rental assistance. General funds decreased by $4.5 million, which is due to a decrease of $20 million in one-time funding for Prince George's County affordable housing programs, partially offset by increases of $5 million to implement the Climate Solutions Now Act and $10 million for the Community Safety Works program, which had been funded in the previous year with federal COVID-19 relief funds. On page 4, you can see in Exhibit 1, this shows all the department's sources and uses of funding for both the operating and capital budgets, as well as non-budgeted funds. In fiscal 2022, DHCD spent about $2.4 billion, with more than half of that coming from revenue bonds and mortgage-backed securities. Only about 9% of the department's spending comes from state funding. Programs that promote homeownership and the development of affordable rental housing each accounted for 38% of spending. Next, I'll talk briefly about the Water Utility Assistance Program, which was funded in fiscal 2023 using funds from the American Rescue Plan, totaling $20 million, which is expected to be one-time funding. This program will provide grants to utilities to pay down outstanding arrearages for households impacted by the pandemic. The program is distinct from the Department of Human Services Low-Income Household Water Assistance Program. While households apply directly to the DHS program, utilities will apply to the DHCD program for bulk relief. Initially, DHCD noted that DHCD and DHS would implement processes to prevent duplication of benefits between the two programs. However, the Water Utility Assistance Program application process is now being managed by DBM rather than by DHCD. And I've asked DHCD to comment on any updates to the original planned process for preventing duplication between the programs. Next, I'd like to skip ahead and talk about DHCD's energy programs. The bottom of page 9 that I'm showing, this shows the changes from fiscal 2023 to the fiscal 2024 allowance after accounting for deficiencies. Funding for energy programs totals $52.2 million in the allowance, which represents an 18% increase. The increase comes from two sources: general funds to implement the Climate Solutions Now Act, as well as federal funds from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. Under the Climate Solutions Act, DHCD is developing a grant program to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in affordable housing projects, and the program is expected to open for applications by this July. Mandated funding of $5 million is included in DHCD's allowance in the operating budget in fiscal 2024, while in fiscal 2023, funding of $3.75 million was restricted in the rainy day fund in DHCD's capital budget and recently released by the governor. The allowance also includes 2 new positions to manage the program. Overall, DHCD will receive just under $46 million in federal funds for the Weatherization Assistance Program from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which DHCD plans to spend across fiscal years 2023 to 2027. The budget includes a $2 million deficiency for fiscal 2023, as well as $6 million in fiscal 2024. The first issue in the analysis, beginning on page 15, relates to the Homeowner Assistance Fund, which was created through the American Rescue Plan to provide relief to homeowners at risk of displacement. Maryland received nearly $250 million for the program, all administered by DHCD. Exhibit 7 on page 15 shows how these funds have been appropriated across DHCD's operating and capital budgets. Although budgeted funding decreases quite a bit in the allowance, DHCD will continue to use the prior year's capital appropriations to disperse funds under the program, with anticipated expenditures of approximately $70 million in fiscal 2023 and $60 million in each of fiscal 2024 and 2025. And this funding is available through September 2026. Exhibit 8 on page 16 shows how DHCD allocated the program funds as well as the expenditures as of January. Most of the funding is for grants and loans to prevent foreclosure. And overall, DHCD had expended or approved nearly $80 million, including about $58 million for household assistance to more than 4,200 households. Exhibit 9 on page 18 shows the status of foreclosures in Maryland. State and federal actions, including forbearance and a moratorium on filing notices of intent, kept foreclosures down in 2020 and 2021. Both notices of intent and notices of foreclosure have increased since those protections ended. Notices of intent are starting to approach pre-pandemic levels, while notices of foreclosure remain below. The next issue relates to the Emergency Rental Assistance Program, or ERAP. It's on page 19. ERAP is nearing the end of available funds. As you can see in Exhibit 10, Maryland's ERAP funding totaling more than $750 million was split across 2 rounds, as well as between DHCD and direct allocations to the largest 8 local jurisdictions. The fiscal 2024 allowance only includes a small amount of administrative funding for the program, as nearly all funding for both rounds was appropriated in prior years. DHCD distributed most of its funds to all 24 local jurisdictions, as shown in Exhibit 11 on page 21. DHCD retained some funding to administer directly, including $25.5 million for affordable housing development, as well as a little over $50 million to provide bulk relief through the Assisted Housing Relief Program to tenants in multifamily properties. Exhibit 12 on page 22 shows ERAP expenditures by grantee as of November 2022, with the top bar representing DHCD's portion of the program. Overall, ERAP had provided assistance to more than 101,000 households as of November. That's 75% of all funding expended. All ERAP funds are expected to be exhausted by March or April 2023. As of this month, only 6 local programs have fully open applications, while 3 more were open on a limited basis only to households at imminent risk of eviction. An estimated more than 100,000 Maryland households remained behind on rent as of December, with estimated rental debt totaling nearly $375 million. Exhibit 13 on page 23 shows failure to pay rent cases and evictions over time, with data available through last September. Although still below pre-pandemic levels, evictions increased significantly during calendar 2022, with more than 4,100 households evicted in the third quarter, which represents a 78% increase compared to the same period in 2021. The third and final issue in the analysis relates to broadband, which, as you know, has seen funding greatly expanded due to federal legislation. The state has allocated $400 million from the American Rescue Plan for broadband programs across the fiscal 2021 to 2023 budgets, as shown in Exhibit 14 on page 25. This chart also includes about $35 million from other sources in prior years. This chart does not include funding expected from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, and no funding for that is in the fiscal 2024 allowance, and I'll discuss that in a minute. Most of the funding for broadband is provided through the capital budget and will be discussed in DHCD's capital budget analysis. I'll focus today on the operating programs shown in Exhibit 15 on page 26. All of these were newly created in fiscal 2022. The Maryland Emergency Broadband Benefit provides a subsidy for household broadband costs on top of the Affordable Connectivity Program, which is a federal program. As of January, more than 50,000 Maryland households were enrolled in Maryland's program. Program funding totaling $45 million was provided in fiscal 2022 and is expected to last until fiscal 2025. The next program, the Connected Devices Program, funded with a total $30 million, will provide devices to low-income households. And the first round of awards to local jurisdictions and community partners to distribute the devices. The announcement of those awards is expected very soon. Exhibit 16 on page 28 shows the overall funding for broadband initiatives in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. The largest pot of money is the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program, or BEAD, which has a $100 million minimum for each state and will primarily fund larger infrastructure projects. The state allocations for this funding will be based on maps currently under development by the FCC, and those allocations are expected to be announced in June. The next program is the State Digital Equity Capacity Grant, from which Maryland is expected to receive about $4.8 million annually. In December, DHCD received initial planning grants for both of these programs, about $5 million for BEAD, and just under $1 million for the Digital Equity Program for DHCD to develop 5-year action plan, as well as a digital equity plan. These planning efforts are underway, and DHCD hopes to have a statewide plan available by the summer. Finally, page 30 shows the DLS recommendation, which is to adopt narrative related to DHCD's broadband programs, requesting that broadband programs and sub-programs be separately identified in DHCD's budget in order to enable improved tracking of the allocations and expenditures by specific purpose. And that concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Haskell, as usual, just great analyst. Seeing no questions from any members of the committee at the time, I would like to bring up the agency for the agency's response, and that is Acting Secretary Jake Day and his team.
Mr. Chairman, distinguished members of the panel, good afternoon. Thank you for having us here today. To my right is Owen McAvoy, Deputy Secretary, Department of Housing and Community Development, and Robin Chaconis, the Chief Operating Officer of the department. We also have a couple of other members from our executive management team behind me. And so we can bring up other experts if there are questions that I'm not yet fluent in. I want to acknowledge also Ms. Haskell and just say thank you for the thorough analysis. I am excited to take the helm of this great organization and to respond to any questions that you have today. But if I can just offer a few thoughts. First of all, we recognize that the importance of our work is to provide affordable, accessible, safe, and desirable housing for all Marylanders. And there are a number of programs that were mentioned today that support that objective. I think we are also one of the most efficient uses of Maryland's limited taxpayer dollars. The department leverages those state dollars, the relatively small general fund impact for huge private investment and economic benefit statewide. I also want to note that in the context of working hard under Governor Moore and Lieutenant Governor Miller to rebuild Maryland government, we recognize that we're in a fairly good position with less than 8% vacancy, 27 vacant PINs, and those positions I'll be working hard to fill over the coming months. We also, I want to call attention to the fact that, yes, we have an overall 18.5% reduction in our operating request this year, but 11% reduction as well in the general fund budget request. I think that's just worth noting. So responding to a couple of the recommendations from DLS that were addressed. First, with respect to the Water Utility Assistance Program, I want to note that we agree that it's important, or I want to draw attention to the fact that I think it's important that we take a holistic view of affordability. And yes, that includes utility costs for Maryland families. We agree that DBM and DHCD need to deconflict here, and that work is already happening. DBM has planned to cross-check this program with the DHS program to avoid duplication, and the application documents have language in them that makes applicants attest to not double dipping in other programs, other utility assistance programs. The second issue that we wanted to respond to was with respect to the clear identification of the broadband operating funds. And while I want to emphasize that the infrastructure funds, the digital equity and inclusion funds are an important facet to restoring Maryland neighborhoods and families who have faced disinvestment, historic disinvestment. We agree with the recommendation that we need to create a new sub-program or a program structure to acknowledge that these funds need to be accounted for separately from other DHCD programs. And the last thing I'll do before I pause for questions is just to note that with respect to emergency rental assistance, I think we all want to acknowledge that there is a cliff facing many Maryland families. we need to be responsive to that. And I know that not only within DHCD, but within the administration, and as well as really every member of the General Assembly that I've spoken to thus far, this is something we're all concerned about and interested in responding to in a sustainable way in the FY24 budget. So know that I'll be a partner in trying to identify and find a solution there. With that, I will pause for your questions.
Senator Hadelman.
Much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much, Mr. Acting Secretary, for being here and for your last comment. The chairman and I and others were certainly very involved in working with the department really closely on the distribution and the structures, and had terrific people to work with in the department on the distribution of emergency rental assistance and kind of the program specifics. I'm happy to hear that this is a priority for you. The numbers are certainly concerning. The other thing that I wanted to raise with you is the really dramatic transformation that has happened in a number of jurisdictions with regard to the infrastructure that was created as a result of having to distribute these many millions of dollars. We all realize it was an incredibly unique period of history to have this kind of federal aid come into the state. But I think that infrastructure that's been created in my county, between the Department of Housing and United Way, and I think we'll hear from some folks there, and other local nonprofits, is really to be celebrated. And I'd hate for that to all disappear in the face of that aid not being there anymore. And so I'd just be interested in your thoughts on how we can still use that infrastructure as an eviction prevention and, you know, supportive structure.
Sure, Senator. I think, thank you for that. And I've seen it firsthand in Wycomico County with the Wycomico County Department of Planning and Zoning and Community Development, as well as our United Way, each of whom had a hand in dispersing the funds in that jurisdiction. What I would say is that while I don't have a designed answer to that or a programmatic answer yet to that, I think one of the things that I've seen is we're fairly good at DHCD is fairly good at passing resources on to local jurisdictions and to local partners, our community action agencies, our partners such as county government, municipal government. It's one of the things that we do effectively and with a fairly small team, a comparatively small team. And so as a result, I think we can continue to be good partners to them in capacity building or capacity retaining, as it were, over the next cycle of this budget. And I will take into account your question and your comment there in what our response is to the next iteration of emergency rental assistance, that ensuring we're continuing to support those organizations and those partners at the local level is going to be an important part of whatever the solution looks like. And I don't know what that solution looks like yet. I'm giving it a lot of thought right now, and I know there are lots of ideas floating around. But whatever that is, I think the capacity supporting piece of it at the local level needs to not be lost, and I'll make sure that we pay attention to that.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Adelman. And Mr. Secretary, I got two questions. And I guess more or less for the sake of it's a number of advocacy, so I'm just going to move through it real quick. If you could just provide us with the demographic and geographic information for Project Restore to our budget analysts, I just have an interest in that. Then also have an interest in broadband. It's a significant amount of money that's coming towards the agency specifically for broadband. I just want to make sure the equity is applied to that. You all have received, I believe, $1 million in reference to just the development or just kind of to have that conversation thus far, and just want to understand how are those dollars being spent at this time to have the conversation around broadband.
Mr. Chairman, just to clarify, make sure I understand. So demographic and geographic distribution figures for Project Restore, yes, and for all of our broadband infrastructure monies. And
well, you all received $1 million for to develop the digital equity plan.
The digital equity
so
plan.
How you all are having these conversations, that would be super helpful for the committee.
Not a problem.
All right.
I'm sure we can produce that.
Yes,
Absolutely.
Seeing no more questions by any members of the committee, I just wanted to make a couple comments before we go to the next part of it. This is the first time that we've had this many witnesses for any level of an agency report. As the chair, we do have discretion in reference to how much time we spend with our respective folks that are given. I apologize, Secretary Day, I'm just talking to the crowd.
Understood.
In reference to how long we hear it, we did get a special request from one of the members on the committee. So I'm going to ask that United Way and I believe Legal Aid, you will get 10 minutes. Everyone else will get 5 minutes. And then there's a couple constituents that we see some folks all the time, but the constituents we don't see all the time. And we want to make sure that there is no time limit on you all. It's two names that I hadn't seen before, but please be thoughtful and in reference to how long you do speak. There is no time limit for those constituents we don't see every day. So at that time, I'd like to call up Scott Gottbrett from the United Way of Central Maryland.
Great. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and for all the folks of this committee. And thank you so much, Senator McCray and Senator Hedelman for signing on to the statewide coalition letter to help advocate for emergency rental assistance following the conclusion of ERAP. I'm Scott Gottbrett. I'm the Vice President of United Way of Central Maryland, Vice President of Housing. And United Way of Central Maryland is one of the members that's part of the statewide coalition, now known as the Maryland Emergency Rental Assistance Coalition, that represents more than 50 organizations, several elected officials, advocating for rental assistance in the state of Maryland. Our advocacy effort to appeal to Governor Hogan prior to leaving office to allocate additional funds for emergency rental assistance was signed on to at the time by 4 county executives and the mayor of Baltimore City in late 2022. Since that time, the county executives of Prince George's County and Frederick County have added their names to that appeal, drawing attention to the desperate situation facing many Maryland renters and the folks that are struggling to keep up in the wake of the pandemic. One of the things that I've sort of been suggesting publicly is that we recharacterize the debate away from one in which we're describing ongoing income losses stemming from the pandemic, and instead conceive of the current problem as one of a rent debt crisis. So households that lost their income in 2020 and 2021 may have accumulated 3 or 4 or 5 months of rent debt. And despite regaining an income and resuming making regular rent payments, they can still have rent debt that's followed them since then that they're unable to make progress on, especially for low income renters who may have regained employment, but still as a result of rising cost of living may find themselves unable at the end of the month to have money left over to pay down on past rent debt. There's a bit of a misconception that those seeking rent debt are folks who are coming back a second or third time. Evidence from the National Equity Atlas, which was an important source for the Department of Legislative Services analysis, suggests that 64% of renters with rent debt have not yet applied for rental assistance. In fact, with 100,000 renters behind on rent, 80% of those households are households of color, 82% are low income, 41% are currently unemployed, and 52% are households with children. As United Way who's been working in this space for approximately a decade, we can tell you firsthand that evictions are extremely traumatic for families and children. Every time a household becomes evicted or a family is displaced, it puts students 3 or more months behind in their studies, which is a major driver of dropping out or being held back a grade. And we know from the evidence, academic consensus is approximately 1 in 10 evictions leads to homelessness. So while we are currently staring down an evictions crisis, we will soon be staring down a social crisis. If a large number of households are evicted, we'll see significant numbers of folks entering the shelter system. The Maryland Emergency Rental Assistance Coalition came together and requested $175 million. That was sort of the number that we came up with and vetted with several important partners, including the National Low Income Housing Coalition and other think tanks and stakeholders. Based off of that analysis, we've assembled a very handy 2-page fact sheet, which I brought copies of if you'd like, or we can circulate via email as well. The $175 million price tag is a large ask. It's a large outstanding, a debt crisis. I think the Department of Legislative Services identified that there are $375 million of outstanding rent debt that's facing Maryland renters. And so you can kind of see in context, that is a number that doesn't just come from thin air, but is well supported in the evidence in the national literature and even the US Census Bureau's numbers. That said, our fact sheet does include a range of options for funding levels. So if $175 million is either too much or too little, our fact sheet sort of lays out a table of what could be achieved or what households could be assisted with different levels of funding, whether the number of months or how many months of forward rent or the income level of households. And so I think it's a useful tool there for you all to consider. It also shows the math for how we arrived at the $175 million estimate of the amount of outstanding need that would be important. Those funds that have been requested, $175 million, would assist approximately 20,000 households. That's not the total outstanding need. That's the number of households that evidence suggests would apply for rental assistance, right? So it's not just how many households are in need, but likely applicants. And if you just looked at the outstanding need, it would be something like $375 million, but not all the folks who are behind on rent would necessarily apply for rental assistance. Another recommendation that we have is the creation of an ongoing task force to make recommendations about rental assistance for FY25 and beyond. In my opinion, we are still in a pandemic year. And while the pandemic is receding and not causing as many income disruptions, as I mentioned, the rent debt stemming from the pandemic is still alive and well and is what needs to be addressed. Regarding an ongoing safety net for renters, for FY25 and beyond, one of our recommendations is that a standing task force be set up in order to make recommendations for Maryland in order to further drill down on the data and vet recommendations. And so one other point to drive home is that massive amounts of rent debt aren't just a problem for renters, they're also a problem for landlords. I don't claim to speak for the landlord community, but interfacing with a lot of smaller landlords, and my wife and I also, having rented out our basement as an Airbnb, we can tell you how important for small landlords that is to the makeup of our monthly income and our ability to pay our mortgage. And a lot of families have turned to renting out their home or rooms of their home to renters, and it's those families that are also impacted by the rent debt crisis. Those are families and seniors that wouldn't be able to pay their mortgage if their tenants remain delinquent on rent debt. So it's part of an entire set of interventions in the housing space. One rejoinder that I hear often when we talk about emergency rental assistance is that a lot of folks are interested in investing in affordable housing. And I absolutely agree that affordable housing is a very important tool in the toolbox. However, I would caution that what we're staring down right now is a short-term crisis, and affordable housing is a long-term tool, especially the construction of new affordable housing. We need interventions and help for tenants in the coming months, not the coming years. And so I would urge, the Maryland General Assembly and the folks in this room to consider not just investing in affordable housing, but finding a way to emphasize both tools in the toolbox. It's like saying, why do you need a saw if you already have a screwdriver, right? Well, you need both tools in order to build a house, right? And that's what we're trying to do, is stabilize the housing market. And emergency rental assistance is a very important tool in that toolbox and responding to a subset of the crisis. So I'll yield any remaining time that I have for questions and for the other folks in the audience who are, especially the constituents that are here to share their personal stories and struggles regarding rental assistance.
Seeing no questions from the committee, I'd like to bring up Ms. Lisa Klingenmeyer from Welfare Advocates.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Lisa Klingenmeyer. I'm the Assistant Director of Advocacy at Catholic Charities of Baltimore, and I chair Welfare Advocates. We're here today in strong support of the Department of Housing and Community Development and of its budget, and to ask for state allocation for emergency rental assistance. Catholic Charities is a provider of emergency rental assistance. We provide it in Baltimore City through the Samaritan Center, and we were also a provider of ERAP in Baltimore County. And when I asked our caseworkers how the program's been going, they said demand is overwhelming and consistent. And when I asked our administrator what he thinks will happen when the federal dollars run out, if there's no more investment in emergency rental assistance, and he said it will be catastrophic. The need and demand is so high. There's no way for organizations like ours without additional investment in emergency rental assistance to meet this demand. We simply will not be able to serve the families coming to us anymore, except potentially through the homeless shelters that we run and the soup kitchens that we run. I know a lot of the metrics in the economy right now, unemployment and job growth are looking good, but we know it takes the longest for those with the lowest incomes to recover. And low-income families have long struggled to obtain housing assistance. I know this body, many of our organizations have worked on these issues for a really long time. But to Senator Hedelman's point, what is new is the infrastructure that we've built to disseminate emergency rental assistance. And we really should maintain this structure and continue to invest in it. We know that housing is a cornerstone for family well-being, and that thriving families mean a thriving state. And so we look forward to continue to work with this body, and a special thank you to the chair and to Senator Hedelman, who I know have been supporting the emergency rental assistance issue. We look forward to working with Acting Secretary Day and his team to make sure that the low-income families who need emergency assistance to be able to pay their rent is able to secure it. Thank you.
Thank you. And seeing no questions from the committee, I'd like to bring up Ms. Sarah Price from Maryland Retailers Association.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, honorable members of the subcommittee. My name is Sarah Price, and I'm here on behalf of the Maryland Retailers Association. While rental assistance is incredibly important and we are supportive of all efforts in that direction, I'm actually here to speak with you about the Main Street Maryland program. The Retailers Association works with the Department of Housing and Community Development to support the mission of the Main Street Maryland program, and I'm here to emphasize the importance of maintaining funding for that program. The Main Street Maryland program preserves local historic and cultural resources while supporting small businesses and promoting new investment and development. There are 33 state designated main streets in Maryland and 8 additional Main Street neighborhoods that are managed by the city of Baltimore. And all 41 main streets have access to apply for project funding from the Main Street Improvement Program, which is a line item under the Division of Neighborhood Revitalization. The improvement program can provide much needed grant funding for main streets to execute projects like advertising campaigns, updating their economic plans, completing facade improvement on historic buildings, and even leveraging their grant funding for larger grants that require matching funds for access. We've consistently advocated for increased funding to this program because that line item had stagnated at about $400,000 for several years. And when that's divvied up between applications from 41 main streets, it doesn't go very far. Governor Hogan included an additional $600,000 to the program last year, bringing the total up to $1 million. And this allowed for the department to provide equal funding to every main street for the first time. For some of the main streets, it was the first time in years that they had been able to receive any money from this pot. Governor Moore maintained that $1 million in this year's proposed budget, and we would just ask that you please preserve that funding so that our, Maryland's small business epicenters can continue to grow and thrive. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Price. Seeing no further questions from members of the committee, I'd like to bring up Jay Mishi from the city of Tawnytown.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, distinguished members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to testify today. My name is Jay Mishi. I'm the Main Street Manager and the Economic Development Director for the city of Tawnytown in northwestern Carroll County. And while increased funding is always appreciated, today I want to share with you about consistent funding. The transition from the $400,000 allocation that Main Streets had to compete for to a $1 million allocation that gave all 33 Main Streets a $20,000 block grant was perhaps the most impactful result of the increase from fiscal year 23. Most main streets are funded from a mix of local jurisdiction funding, program income, and fundraising, in addition to the competitive Main Street Improvement Program grants of the recent past. That made it challenging to plan and budget for long-term projects because all 4 funding streams were variable. The increased allocation and subsequent block grant style distribution adds a level of consistency and predictability that was previously absent. Guaranteed funding allows Main Street programs to move beyond daily operations and small-scale projects. It provides the foundation for long-term transformative initiatives. One example that we're exploring in Tawnytown involves parking. A stable and reliable annual $20,000 grant to us as part of the $1 million program allocation will allow us to embark on a 3-year parking reform plan. Year 1 involves commissioning a comprehensive parking study to assess current city parking lots, on-street parking, and residential parking needs for consumers, workers, and residents, potential roadblocks to parking, and solutions. Year 2 involves improving current parking assets, while Year 3 completes the project by implementing new solutions. Without the consistent funding provided by the General Assembly, it's nearly impossible for a Main Street program to seriously embark on a multi-year project like this. Parking is just one high-profile example of a complex project that this allocation from Governor Moore's budget will enable. Other examples include improved marketing and improved accessibility for residents, consumers, and workers with disabilities. We're grateful for the governor's continued investment in our historic walkable downtowns, and we hope that the Senate sees fit to continue allocating these funds. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no questions from the committee, I'd like to bring up Aurora Cummings. Ms. Cummings, as you're walking up, I just want to reiterate, please take your time.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for allowing me to speak. I am someone who has applied for rental assistance through the eviction prevention program. So originally, this is a program I didn't even know existed, as I didn't necessarily ever need this kind of help before. But as I've listened to other people speak, moving into a season outside of COVID, as that's behind us, there's still trailing a everlasting issue of rent and people having the ability to properly catch up on their rent and stay current with it. So, as everything's, coming back to a state of flourishment, it's becoming harder for people to come out of that vicious cycle of being behind when they need the funding, more funding available from the, eviction program to be able to catch up on their bills and stay current with them. Having the proper assistance provided would inevitably allow me and many other people who apply to this program to get current with rent and the ability to easily sustain and keep up from there. I personally applied to the program as a last resort once I exhausted any bits of resources of help I had, including my own money, as slow as it was at the time. I've never got this assistance before. And within a few weeks of seeing so many people and hearing so many stories, a lot of people are seeking help currently as last resort to desperation to save their homes. There's much need to continue the eviction prevention program. So as there's still people requesting help, if there's little or no funding left to fully help the people who think they have a safety net available, they'll end up in homeless shelters. And from what I see with my own eyes, being as though I've applied, so I'm coming in and out of this office a lot of people are going to be homeless, and it's only going to exacerbate the homeless issue instead of, having support to keep people in the houses that they already have. I really would like to hope and see that, the eviction prevention program is protected, and that also it extend funding to prevent evictions. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no questions from the committee, I did just want to say thank you for testifying before our committee, and we hear you loud and clear.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. At this time, I would like to bring up Mr. Matt Hill from the Public Justice Center.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Again, my name is Matt Hill. I'm an attorney at the Public Justice Center, and I want to start by thanking, as other folks have, you, Mr. Chair, and Senator Hedelman for signing on to the letter that Scott referenced. And I want to thank Acting Secretary Day for his remarks, and to paraphrase, that essentially something may be in the works to replace emergency rental assistance, and we appreciate that, and we look forward to working with him on that. But I do sense that we need a greater sense of urgency in this matter. This is happening now. The funds are running out March, April, and there will be no further safety net once those funds are gone. Again, it's $30 million a month the state is spending right now to prevent numerous evictions. And if Maryland is serious about leaving no one behind, that must include renting families who have a financial setback, like a medical emergency, job loss, and are facing eviction. Again, the Emergency Rental Assistance Program has been enormously successful. You've helped 100,000 Maryland families avoid eviction and help small to large landlords get paid. And so if the pandemic has taught us one thing, it's that an emergency setback does not have to end in tragedy and eviction. I just want to highlight one other aspect of this that I think is really important. And everyone talks a lot about racial and gender equity these days. And this program really has embodied racial and gender equity. 70% of the families that avoided eviction with help from emergency rental assistance were led by women. Almost 80% were Black and Latina households in Maryland. That's incredible. But now, unless the governor acts, unless this body acts, that critical lifeline is going to be yanked away, and we would return to the bad old days when there was basically no emergency rental assistance to assist families who are in the greatest need. So thank you very much for your time.
And thank you, Mr. Hill. Seeing no further questions from members of the committee, at this time, I would like to bring up Ms. Claudia Wilson Randall from the Community Development Network of Maryland.
Good afternoon, Chair and members of the committee. Thank you so much for the opportunity to talk about the Department of Housing and Community Development's operating budget. I just want to make a few points. I also want to thank my colleagues for talking about the urgent need for rental assistance statewide. We would certainly join in that and are part of those coalitions and join in that chorus. There's just an overwhelming need for rental assistance. I would also just want to make one other point, which is that applications for emergency rental assistance has also been a barometer about the need for rental assistance. And without that, my question is, okay, so when is it a crisis? We don't have a measure without that measure of demand for emergency rental assistance. So it's really important that we act. I would just echo what the other speakers have said about emergency rental assistance. I also want to say that Main Street is a vital program throughout the state of Maryland, really important investments from the Eastern Shore, Western Maryland, Baltimore City. We need to keep that going. That funding for Main Street has been a vital lifeline in commercial areas that have suffered distress throughout the pandemic. I also want to mention today the state's homeowners assistance fund. In addition to renters needing assistance, homeowners also need assistance. The Maryland State's program got off to a slow start, but it also relies on people having access to the internet. And a great number of people facing foreclosure in the coming days will be older adults without an email address. So it's really important that we braid the state's broadband subsidies and digital divide with existing programs. So for example, people getting homeowners assistance program funds, or people getting emergency rental assistance, or people getting the whole home program could also at the same time be getting a broadband subsidy. So I just want to urge the discussion of broadband being braided with other state programs within the Department of Housing and Community Development. As we move forward, I think that's a critical gap to fill. And I don't want to lose sight of that. Finally, you have my written testimony, but I just want to make a plug for an additional $1,499,000 in Bernie operating funds. Right now, the operating allocation for that has been proposed is 499,864. So I would hope that we could make it a full 2 million in operating funds to go to nonprofits within Baltimore City working on neighborhood revitalization strategies. It's really urgent that those organizations have sustaining funds in order to carry out their the capital fund programs. And many of those communities are also receiving Community Legacy and Project Restore and other capital programs, but they need operating assistance in order to carry out those capital programs. So I just want to make that point. And with that, I just want to thank you again for hearing testimony from the Community Development Network. We are the state's advocacy organization for the community development sector across the state. So thank you so much for having me today.
Thank you, Ms. Randall, and thank you for your leadership. At this time, I would like to bring up Yendi Chavez. And Ms. Chavez, Trent, as you all are coming up, just take your time. Yeah.
Can we have one next, Mr. Chair, can we have one additional minute for translation?
No, you got the floor. The floor is yours. We said that at the beginning.
Hola, mi nombre es Yendi Chávez. Soy de Honduras, vivo en el condado de Howard, en la ciudad de Elkridge. Como inquilina, me siento preocupada, presionada, desesperada e incluso sin derechos.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Yendi Chavez. I'm from Honduras and I live in Howard County in the city of Elkridge. As a tenant, I feel worried, pressured, desperate, and sometimes without rights.
El solo saber que hay un posible apoyo del gobierno para una asistencia de renta sería para mí grandiosa. Saber que estos fondos sean aprobados como apoyo a la comunidad inmigrante y de bajos recursos. Para los inquilinos podamos acceder ante una necesidad extrema y nos podamos sentir aceptados y apoyados por nuestro Estado, más aún ahora que ha subido todo y menos el salario de trabajo.
Just knowing that there's possible support from the state for rental assistance would be a huge relief. It would be great if we as tenants could have support when we're facing extreme needs like we often are. And even more so now that everything has gone up except our wages. I really believe that if we could have this assistance, it would help us to feel a part of the community, supported and accepted.
Muchas de las familias atrasadas en el alquiler somos familias inmigrantes de bajos recursos y con niños como la mía. Yo he pasado experiencias de que ya ha llegado la fecha de pagar la renta y no tener el dinero suficiente para pagar. Eso preocupa, es estresante. Hasta he tenido que buscar dinero prestado y estar endeudado para pagar a tiempo, porque si no paga a tiempo lo echan del lugar.
Many of the families behind on rent are low-income immigrants like myself, or single mothers like myself. I've had experiences where I haven't had enough money to pay, and I've had to borrow from family members to be able to do it. And it's very stressful because oftentimes we are told if you don't have the money on time, you're going to be evicted.
No es fácil salir de nuestros países y venir a luchar aquí. Y nosotros con nuestro trabajo e impuestos pagados también aportamos. Por eso le pedimos a los legisladores que por favor nos apoyen y aprueben los 175 millones para la asistencia de la renta. Necesitamos su apoyo. Muchas gracias por escucharnos. Feliz tarde.
It is not easy to leave our countries and come here, but we support this country with our work and with our taxes. So that's why I'm asking for your support for this $175 million in rental assistance for our community of renters that needs it. Thank you very much for listening to us, and we need your support.
Thank you. Seeing no questions from the committee, Ms. Chavez, I did want to just say, just thank you for your leadership. Thank you for your attendance today, your testimony today, but most importantly, the courage to share your story. At this time, I'd like to bring up Ness Perry from the LEDC.
Introduction. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for having us. My name is Ness Perry. I'm the advocacy specialist here at LEDC, and I have with me Julia Sarmiento. She specifically works with Baltimore City, Montgomery County, and PG County as well with regards to housing and tenant services.
Good afternoon, committee members. My name is Julia Sarmiento, and I am the Tenant Service and Eviction Prevention at Latino Economic Development Center. I am submitting this testimony to add $175 million to the HCD operating budget to assist an estimated of 20,000 Maryland families in avoiding eviction through the emergency rental assistance. The Latino Economic Development Center is a nonprofit organization. Our mission is to drive economic and social advancement of low to moderate income Latinos and other underserved communities by equipping them with the skills and tools to achieve financial independence and become leaders in their communities. For the past 30 years, LEDC has provided economic development services in underserved communities, serving over 4,000 individuals a year. I'm here today to ask for your support so we can continue working towards our mission to provide support to those on the brink of homelessness. LEDC conducts outreach to be able to meet tenants where they are at. This includes holding meetings at apartment buildings, school, churches, and other community gathering spaces to educate and aid them in processing rental assistance applications. Many of our clients face barriers such as language differences, lack of technology skills, and financial literacy problems. These challenges, combined with the lasting impact of COVID-19 pandemic, have further complicated the issues of tenant face as Maryland residents. Further, people of color constitute roughly 80% of renters who are behind on rent in Maryland. In 2023, 68% of rental assistance funds for Montgomery County have gone to Black and Hispanic households. Maryland jurisdictions are spending approximately $30 million a month to help tenants avoid evictions through direct payments to landlords. The finding will come to an abrupt stop by May of 2023 if there is continued inaction from government stakeholders. This burden must not fall on the sole responsibility of organizations like LEDC, especially as state fund resources dry up. Across the state, we have seen an increase in the number of evictions due to factors including general increase in utility bills, rental inflation, and medical bills. Alongside these factors of loss of income is a recipe for housing instability and or displacement. Quarterly estimates tell us that during the summer of 2022, 4,107 people were evicted from their homes in Maryland. During the month of January 2023, the Montgomery County Sheriff list share a list of 116 households scheduled to be physically displaced from their homes. Over 3,000 families checked into shelters in January of 2023. In Baltimore City, evictions have increased at an alarming rapid rate of 8 per 10,000 city residents. Considering this data, if trends continues, it will result in catastrophic housing instability. We ask that the Senate pass a budget that centers housing and affirms rental assistance as a human right. LEDC urges you to move favorably in amending Bill 181 with the additions of $175 million for emergency rental assistance and related to housing instability. Expenditures should include tenant protections similar to the current federal guidelines and integration with the current eviction process. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Seeing no questions from the committee at this time, I would like to bring up Gulnaz from the Community Legal Services of Prince George's Anne Arundel Eviction Prevention Program.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and distinguished members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify in support of SB 181 with amendments to allocate $175 million to DHCD's operating budget for emergency rental assistance. My name is Golnaz Al-Masavi, and I'm a staff attorney with Community Legal Services of Prince George's County, Inc. in the Anne Arundel Eviction Prevention Program. CLS is a nonprofit organization established to provide legal services to income eligible residents in Prince George's County. CLS extended services to Anne Arundel County in 2020 as the need for eviction prevention increased. CLS attorneys not only provide legal assistance and representation to low-income tenants, but we also have a role in connecting tenants with emergency rental assistance to avoid evictions and help maintain their housing. Although unemployment statistics have recently decreased since the pandemic, many households are facing continued financial difficulties and the threat of housing instability due to various hardships such as job losses and health challenges in the household, while rent costs continue to skyrocket. According to Poverty Amidst Plenty's 2022 report, 45% of Anne Arundel County tenants spent over 30% of their income on rent in 2020. And for many of our clients, rent costs grew significantly since 2020, while household incomes have not proportionally increased. Emergency rental assistance programs have helped maintain housing for hundreds of our clients over the past few years. As we approach the depletion of funds available for emergency rental assistance by May of this year, many households will face evictions. The poverty crisis across Maryland will be exacerbated without continued eviction prevention funds. CLS provides tenants with a list of charitable organizations to call when the need for rental assistance is expressed. Additionally, CLS has an outreach coordinator designated in part to help tenants who have limited resources apply for rental assistance. Recently, we have seen many tenants unable to receive immediate rental assistance as organizations have more limited funds. Over 108,000 households in Maryland are currently behind on rent, and 52% have children in the household. Many CLS clients have more than one young child in the household. Among our clients, CLS represents seniors, individuals with disabilities, and households on fixed incomes. Approving $175 million for the DHCD budget to allocate for eviction prevention would help an estimated 20,000 households remain housed, including our most vulnerable populations. For these reasons, CLS urges support for SB 181 with amendments. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no questions from the committee, I'd like to bring up our last person that's testifying, Gregory Countess from the Maryland Legal Aid.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I'd like to thank, my name is Gregory Countess, I'm from Maryland Legal Aid. I'd like to thank Senator Handelman for the invitation to appear before you today. First of all, we'd like to say that we fully support the comments and the recommendations made by the previous speakers here today. And I'm going to be short. I know that this is a very long afternoon. And just point out the story of one client that we had.
And Mr. Countess, if you could speak into the mic because the folks that are watching.
I'm sorry. Often folks don't have to tell me to get on the mic. I mean, I just gravitate toward it. Again, my name is Gregory Countess and I'm with Maryland Legal Aid. Maryland Legal Aid, as the committee would know, is legal aid provider for those who cannot afford assistance. And we have offices, 12 offices throughout the state, and we cover every jurisdiction throughout the state. So we're familiar with the problems that tenants have faced, both through COVID and before COVID, with having to pay their rent. And if I could, I would just relate the story again of Miss S. We've heard often what this judge said to Miss S. And that is, why do people are working? Why do people need rental assistance? Why can't they pay their rent? And what Miss S said is something I think that's reflected, and you've heard testimony about that today, throughout the entire state.
She works in a job that is low wage. She said to the court in tears, I work every day. But if someone gets sick, if I have to miss work, I don't get paid leave. And that's what, and this may be because of illegal activity that may be taking place in a job, because we know that the assembly has worked to meet the needs of folks who don't have paid leave or sick time. However, in her circumstance, that's where she found herself. And she said she doesn't get paid. And so she was asking for a postponement so that the ERAP program in Wacomico County could make payment to her landlord so that she could not become homeless. And that payment was made. The judge did, in fact, grant that postponement so that her rent could be paid. And the question of why is there a need? I'd point to a rather obvious statistic, one that's compiled by DHCD in its housing needs assessment. And that is that there are over 125,000 families in the state of Maryland who are paying more than 30% of their income in rent. And many times these folks are juggling to pay bills. In some cases, robbing Peter to pay Paul. A shortfall in their income is catastrophic and can lead to devastating consequences. And so I agree also with the United Way that, and DHCD is working on that, and I know that they are, their funding seems to reflect a desire to do more housing production. But as this body knows, and as DHCD knows, it would take between, after funding is in fact awarded, there's a timeline of 18 months to 2 years before an actual unit is produced. So in the short term, we have this need, and it's a need that's not static. It's one that's projected to go up throughout until 2030. And so we would ask this committee to support those like Ms. S. and some of the people that you've heard here today, and devote the recommended $175 million to an eviction prevention program. In closing, homelessness was a public health crisis before COVID. It became even more so during COVID, and it still remains a public health crisis that reverberates all over and throughout a society, whether it be in schools, in the costs for healthcare, instability in neighborhoods. And this passing the recommendation made, this $175 million will go well toward preventing a tragedy for thousands of Maryland tenants. And so I thank you. Thank you. And colleagues, it was brought to my attention that I did miss one person. We have also joining us, this will be the last, I promise. Joy Roberts from Baltimore County Housing and Community Development.
Good afternoon, Chairman and committee. My name is Joy Roberts, and little did I know that when I'd start my placement with Baltimore County's Department of Housing and Community Development as a Baltimore Core Fellow, that I would be a part of a team that continues to oversee nearly $115 million of federal funds invested into eviction prevention and housing stability programming. I am now our housing stability manager. Since March of 2020, that investment of federal funds has helped avert over 8,000 evictions through our innovative STEP and tenant-based eviction prevention program. Also, $1.4 million have been allocated for legal services through partnerships with Maryland Legal Aid, Pro Bono Resource Center, and St. Ambrose Housing Aid Center. Their attorneys have provided free legal advice for over 2,200 Baltimore County callers and free legal representation in county courthouses for over 900 residents. The county has created vital community partnerships with faith-based and community-based organizations, federal and state agencies, property management companies, landlords, our district court and constables offices, and educational institutions to help families stay housed or have more time to make difficult but self-determined decisions. When we first set out to do this work, it was predicted that there would be a tsunami of evictions, especially considering the county continues to have the highest rent court filing in the state. We've been able to avert that tsunami, not because the need was not there, but because of the programs and partnerships we've established and the flexibility of the funds that went to the hardest hit families. With that funding being close to fully expended, we are once again afraid of how that tsunami not may, but will look. While we are proud of the efforts we have taken to help county residents, there's only so much that can be done without further assistance from the state. In late fall, we stopped accepting emergency applications because we had more families to fund than funding available. Anecdotally, we have also seen the loss of naturally occurring affordable housing, coupled with dramatically rising rents across the county, which hampers our ability to provide families assistance when they're in need. This is a need that our agency, our partner agencies that you've already heard from, and the county as a whole witnesses every day. It looks like community school staff trying to help a mom find resources so she and her family don't get evicted. It looks like a single father of 4 just getting back to work, trying to avoid uprooting his children's lives in the middle of the school year, and a senior who has lived in the same unit for 10 plus years, who's on a fixed income, trying to hold on to what they can afford. These are stories that we encountered every day. We get the emails, we get the calls. These are real stories. Earlier this month, County Executive Olszewski announced a local legislative package centered on the creation of housing opportunities as a step that will help stabilize families and revitalize communities in the county. Our collective efforts to develop new housing will not be successful unless we address housing instability now. As we continue to recover from the economic impacts of the pandemic, we support further investment to keep households stable while we rebuild communities, roll out workforce training, and enact new policies to further housing for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Roberts. Thank you for your leadership. I hope that you're an alum of Baltimore Courts now.
I am.
Okay, all right.
I was in the Corps from 2020 in the middle of the pandemic to 2021.
Nice.
And now I'm a full-time employee at DHCD.
Well, thank you for your leadership. Colleagues, this ends the hearings for today, and look forward to seeing you all, and have a blessed weekend.